Jennifer here. Today I'll be talking about how to design an online course. Basically, the method that I use to create really engaging, high quality online classes. It really comes down to knowing what makes a good online course. So the diagram that I have here identifies 6 components that I think classes really need to be good classes. So they are really organized. They have consistent setups, layouts, and organization. They have very clear expectations of what students need to do. So that includes the content they need to review, the steps to complete assignments, how to complete assessments, and how to meet your assessment. So how will they be evaluated? So expectations for everything. Um, um, the students will be engaged in the learning process, all of the content, the tools, the course, all of it will be accessible to students. So being offered in different modes, different ways of accessibility, um, accessible on a mobile device, etc. And then all of the learning activities for the course, everything that you ask the students to do will be aligned with the course competencies. So you get rid of all of the any busy work and you make sure the class is really streamlined so that they are meeting those course competencies. I'm going to just talk about each of these individually. So when I talk about accessible courses, all students can access the course content, the learning activities, and assessments. This really kind of is a huge part of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and all of your accommodations related to accessibility for students. Those are generally defined by your institutions and will be set up by your institutions, but you'll need to make sure that you're aware of all of these components so that your course is accessible. So what to think about now is really your basic course organization. When you're creating materials, instructions, typing things up in your course, you want to make sure that anything you're uploading or you're including is going to be accessible. So think about how it's typed. Make sure that you're using good design so that a screen reader moving through will be able to read the text. If you have PDFs, they're going to be accessible PDFs as opposed to like a scanned document that's not accessible. If you use images in your courses, you will want to make sure that you have alternative text, all of that stuff. So start thinking about it now to make sure you have time to include all of those components. Also, when you're planning out your learning activities, your tools, and the content that you'll use, think about which, make sure if you adopt a tool, make sure that it's going to be accessible for your students or your learning activity. Think about maybe potential challenges if you were to have a student who maybe has some vision deficiencies. For myself, if you have a student in an online classroom and you have a lot of text and they happen to be colorblind, you need to think about how you even present your text on the screen so that the students can see it. For example, I have a bad example right here. This white on top of the yellow box, which wasn't supposed to be there but is there, can be very challenging for somebody with a color vision deficiency to be able to differentiate on the screen. All right, and that box is still there. So we're going to just keep going with it. A second component is student engagement. This helps make your course exciting for the students. We can engage our students by making sure our content and the course learning activities are relevant to the students. So we kind of meet them where they are and we pull them in, make it interesting. We want to include the 3 types of student engagement: student to content, student to student, and student to instructor. We need to create an instructor presence so that our students feel that we are present in our classroom all the time whenever they log in. And we want to come up with ways to motivate our students, relate to our students, and encourage them in their learning processes. I have 2 things circled here: well organized and consistent. It kind of goes together. Pretty much consistency goes with everything. So even the learning activities you pick. But the organization of your class and that consistency will be the first thing that the students are going to notice. In my classes, students will often log in and they're like, oh my gosh, there's so much work. But then they'll start to realize, oh, it's the same pattern, like the activities they're doing is kind of a pattern. So there's some pattern to the activities and the tools. The course, every module is set up the same way, so they know where the information is there. The structure is similar, and they can find things easily. So take time to set up your class at the beginning, because the students will notice and they will comment on it. If you're doing a good job, they'll let you know. Have very clear expectations for what the students are going to be doing. So how much time do they need each week to do the work? Break it down by assignment as much as possible. Set clear expectations in your syllabus. Use weekly checklists, again, with time expectations so the students know what they need to do. Use very specific instructions. Try to add audio and video and photos as needed to help them understand what they need to do, and to make sure you have very clear course competencies. The last thing is that you want to make sure your course competencies are aligned, like everything's aligned in your class. So if you choose to do a learning activity, make sure it aligns to that competency. So again, the students need to be able to read the competencies. The assessments need to be specific so that you can evaluate the competencies. And ultimately, anything you ask the student to do in your class needs to be at some point like scaffolded so that it will promote their successful meeting of that competency. So what makes a good course competency? We want to make sure that they're clear and concise, that our students can read them and understand what they mean, so they're written in very clear language. They need to be observable, so something that you can see within your class. They need to be measurable, so that you can evaluate if they did it or not, if they've met it yet or not. And you'll want to begin with an action verb. So some examples. You want to avoid being too vague. So I have a geology class, and I could say, I want, you're going to investigate minerals. Well, that's not really measurable. I can't evaluate how well they investigated the minerals. But what I can say is identify minerals using the physical properties. So it's beginning with an action verb. They're investigating minerals, and they're using those properties. So not investigating. They're identifying minerals with the physical properties. So I can actually figure out if they identified, gypsum correctly, they did it. If not, they didn't do it. So, it's something that it's observable and measurable. We can create course maps. These are a really good activity to help you understand your course. If you have a course that's already designed, it's definitely recommended to go through it and create a map. So to make sure that it's a logical progression to get the students to the end. So I do a backwards scaffolding. I start with my course competencies, and then I think about what the students need to do to meet those competencies. So it then creates this scaffolded process. You kind of work from the end towards the beginning, so that ultimately you'll have a journey. They'll log into the class and they move along, and they'll meet that course competency at the end. So we need to identify what the students will do to meet the course competencies, figure out how they're going to be evaluated, so what assessments you're going to be using. Plan for the student engagement, so all of the interactions, how they're going to interact with the content, how they're going to interact with each other, and how they're going to interact with the instructor. You do need to have those three components within your course. Maybe not, it doesn't have to be at every step, not every module. It's great if you can get it, but they just need to be it needs to be there throughout the course, but not necessarily at every week. And then make a plan for your instructor presence. This can take a lot of your time. So how will the students know that you're there throughout the whole course? Come up with that early on so that it's part of your course map. And then you'll add in the resources to support your student learning. So this is your content. Sometimes we think of the content first, but I think that the content should you need to make sure the content will help them be able to do the learning activities. So for me, in that scaffolding process, it actually comes last. So what's an example? So I just sketched this out. This is a very preliminary course map. I created this using Microsoft Whiteboard. You could use Google Jamboard if you're looking for another tool that's similar. But basically on the screen we have a unit assessment. So the goal here, this is in their igneous rock unit. So they have two competencies: identify igneous rocks with physical properties and explain how igneous rocks form. The unit assessment is how I evaluate it to say, like, did you get it before you move out of this unit? So they're doing a project where they're identifying some rocks, and specifically igneous rocks, and then explaining the Earth's history that they can glean from that igneous rock. So, what type of rock was it? Where is it forming, etc. So to get to this, they are going to be doing 3 different things. So the learning activities, kind of those formative assessments. They have a practice quiz. They have an igneous rock identification lab and an interesting igneous rocks discussion board. I apologize for the abbreviations. It just made sense at the time. So the students can complete these at any time, but there is some sort of general progression if they wanted to go through it. But very specifically, there is an activity that meets each one of these competencies, and then it's double checked, or it's summatively checked in the unit assessment. And then the green box here, which might be hard to read, says unit content, lecture videos, animations, textbook readings, website readings. So that's the content. So after I figure out what they're going to do, I then start putting all that content together.